A young woman sold herbs in the market, not knowing the lonely Duke would ask for her hand. She thought he was only another stranger buying chamomile and rosemary. But when he stood before the crowd and declared she would be his bride, the entire room went silent. She wasn't just a market girl. She had caught the eye of the most powerful man in the county, and that made her the target of every whisper, every scheme, every cruel lie. Soon, rumors of witchcraft spread, and a forged letter threatened to strip away her honor and cast her into ruin. Alone, with her mother's life hanging by a thread, she had to fight for her dignity, while he risked everything to win her back. Can love survive the weight of lies, scandal, and betrayal? Or will the truth come too late? I'd love to know. Where are you watching from? Type it down below, and while you're here, subscribe so you'll always catch the next story. Morning sun cast long shadows across Ashburn's town square as Clarissa Wren carefully arranged her baskets of herbs and dried flowers. A rough-hewn wooden stall, while simple, displayed nature's bounty with care and pride. The early spring air carried a mix of scents: fresh bread from Miller's bakery, the metallic ring from Thomas the blacksmith's forge, and the sweet perfume of her own dried lavender bundles. "Fresh herbs, healing remedies," Clarissa called out, her voice clear but gentle. She smoothed her warm but clean apron and adjusted the modest cap that contained her brown hair. Around her, the square came alive with the usual morning bustle. Market wives haggling over vegetables, apprentices hurrying on errands, and cartwheels clattering on cobblestones stopped Mrs. Cooper, the innkeeper's wife, stopped to purchase some rosemary. "My joints are troubling me something fierce," she confided, counting out her pennies. "Add this chamomile too," Clarissa suggested warmly, wrapping both herbs in paper. "Steep them together before bed. It will ease your rest." The morning passed steadily with similar small transactions. Clarissa sold bundles of lavender to the chandler's wife for her linens and dried mint to Cook Mary from the manor house. Each sale was accompanied by careful instructions and genuine concern for her. Customers' needs died. As the church bell struck 11, a tall figure appeared before her stall. Wrapped in a fine dark cloak despite the mild weather, he carried himself with unmistakable nobility. Clarissa felt her heart skip. His presence seemed to command the very air around him. "Good day, sir," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "How might I help you?" The stranger's eyes, startlingly blue beneath his hood, studied her carefully. "I seek something to soothe a troubled heart," he said, his refined accent confirming her suspicion of his high birth. Clarissa's hands moved surely among her baskets, though she felt the weight of his gaze. "Troubled hearts need gentle care, my lord," she said, selecting several herbs. "Here is lemon balm for peace of mind, and sweet violet to ease melancholy. Combined with lavender, they make a most comforting tisane." She wrapped the herbs carefully in clean linen, explaining, "Steep 1 spoonful in hot water for 5 minutes, just before retiring. The warmth and herbs together will calm troubled thoughts." The stranger listened intently, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he placed several silver coins in her palm, far more than the herbs were worth. "Your knowledge is as valuable as your wares," he said quietly, tucking the package into his cloak. Without another word, he turned and strode away, his fine boots silent on the cobblestones. Around her, Clarissa became aware of whispered conversations. "Did you see his bearing?" muttered the butcher's wife. "Like ice, he was," responded the candlemaker, shaking his head. "No good comes from such proud folk among us common people." The rest of the day passed in a blur of small sales and excited gossip. When evening finally came, Clarissa packed her remaining herbs and walked home to the small cottage. She shared with her mother Dot the modest supper of bread and soup was warm and welcome after the long day. Her mother, Ellen Wren, stirred the fire and said casually, Have you heard the talk? They say the Duke of Ashburn himself was seen in town today. Clarissa's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. She remembered those piercing blue eyes, the aristocratic bearing, the generous payment. Was he indeed? She murmured, her mind returning to the mysterious stranger at her stall. Aye, her mother continued, unaware of her daughter's thoughts. First time in years, they say. Wonder what brings him down from that great house of his. Clarissa gazed into the fire, remembering the stranger's request for herbs to soothe a troubled heart. Could the proud Duke of Ashburn himself have sought her simple remedies? The thought seemed impossible, yet those eyes haunted her memory. The morning mist clung to the cobblestones as Clarissa arranged her herbs with care. Her fingers, already chilled from the dawn air, moved swiftly among the bundles of dried lavender and sprigs of rosemary. All around the square, fellow merchants set up their wares, but something felt different today. Villagers walked past her, stall with quick glances toward the square's center, their whispers carrying on the cool breeze. Did you see him? Mrs. Baker leaned close to her friend, her voice barely contained. Clear as day, that's his carriage by the fountain. Clarissa's heart quickened as she recalled the mysterious gentleman from 2 days past. Before she could ponder further, a familiar tall figure approached their stall, his fine cloak unmistakable, even in the morning haze. Good morrow, Miss Wren, he said, his voice carrying the refined tones of nobility. The surrounding chatter died away as heads turned toward her humble stall. Your Grace, Clarissa curtsied deeply, her cheeks warming. So the whispers had been true. He was indeed the Duke of Ashburn. I must thank you, he continued, seemingly unaware of the attention they drew. Your herbal mixture granted me the first peaceful night's rest I have known in many years. Clarissa's fingers twisted in her apron. I am most pleased to hear it. Your Grace, pray tell, how did you learn such skills? The Duke's eyes held genuine interest as he studied her collection of herbs. These are arranged with considerable knowledge. My grandmother taught me, Your Grace, Clarissa answered, warming to the subject despite her nervousness. She knew every plant in the woods around Ashburn and their uses for healing. And your family? Do they share your expertise? Just my mother now, Your Grace. Father passed 5 winters ago, but Mother helps me gather and dry the herbs. Their conversation flowed easily, too easily for the rigid social boundaries between them. Clarissa could hear the shocked murmurs growing around them. A duke speaking to a market trader as if she were a person of consequence. Well, came a sneering voice from behind them. Mr. Thimbleton, the prosperous cloth merchant, stood with his hands on his ample waist. Quite above herself, our little herb girl is taking up Your Grace's valuable time with common chatter. The square fell silent. Clarissa's face burned with shame, but before she could speak, the Duke turned slowly to face the merchant. His expression had transformed from gentle interest to stern authority. Mistress Wren's knowledge and skill are far from common, sir, he said, his voice carrying across the hushed square. Her dignity in the face of such poor manners proves her worth far better than your words prove yours. The Duke's gaze swept the gathering crowd. This young woman's expertise has brought me more relief than all the fine physicians of London. I would have you treat her with the respect she has earned. Mr. Thimbleton's face had turned the color of sour milk. He backed away with a clumsy bow, nearly tripping over his own feet. When darkness fell that evening, Clarissa sat with her mother beside their small hearth. The firelight cast dancing shadows on the cottage walls as she recounted the day's events. It's not natural, dear one, her mother said softly, her fingers busy with her mending. A duke should not single out a market trader for conversation. People will talk. I know, mother. Clarissa watched the flames flicker. His kindness does me honor, but she hesitated, searching for words. It frightens me too. Why would such a great lord take notice of our little stall? Her mother set down her sewing and reached for Clarissa's hand. "We must be careful, my dear. The attention of nobles rarely brings peace to common folk like us." Clarissa's fingers trembled as she carried her woven basket through the grand entrance of Penrose Manor. The weight of fresh herbs, fragrant thyme, ripe mint, and delicate parsley steadied her somewhat as she gazed up at crystal chandeliers that sparkled like captured stars. Ladies in silk gowns of every color swept past, their skirts rustling like autumn leaves. The scent of beeswax candles and roasting meats filled the air. "The kitchen is below stairs, girl," a footman said, not unkindly, gesturing toward a narrow servants' corridor. She nodded gratefully and made her way down, the sounds of violins and gay laughter floating from above. In the busy kitchen, the cook accepted her herbs with approval, pressing a few extra coins into her palm. "Stay and enjoy the dancing if you wish," the cook whispered. "There's room in the gallery for watching." Unable to resist such an opportunity, Clarissa crept up to the minstrel's gallery overlooking the ballroom. The sight below took her breath away. Couples turning in perfect time, jewels glinting, fine boots clicking against polished floors. She recognized several village nobles, including the sharp-faced Baroness Rothbury in emerald silk. Miss Wren. The deep voice behind her made her jump. "I had hoped to find you here." She turned to see the Duke of Ashbourne, his evening clothes as black as midnight save for the crisp white of his cravat. His eyes were warm, despite his formal bearing. "Your Grace," she curtsied, her cheeks flushing. I was just delivering herbs for the kitchen." "And now you shall deliver me from boredom," he said with a slight smile. "Will you honor me with a dance?" Before she could protest, he had taken her hand and led her down to the ballroom floor. The music seemed to falter as heads turned their way. Clarissa heard the whispers begin, saw the shocked faces, but the Duke's firm guidance kept her moving through the steps she knew only from watching village dances. Well, a cutting voice rang out as the music ended. Baroness Rothbury stood before them, her fan snapping open like a blade. "How charitable of you, Your Grace, to dance with the market girl." "Though really, my dear," she addressed Clarissa with false sweetness, "herbs and vegetables are better suited to your station than silk and society." Cruel laughter rippled through the crowd. Clarissa felt her face burn with shame as the Baroness continued, "Did you think a few dried flowers could disguise the smell of common trade? This is no place for her. Enough!" The Duke's voice cracked like thunder through the hall. All fell silent as he stepped forward, his tall frame rigid with anger. "You speak of station, Baroness? Then let me speak of worth. This market girl, as you name her, has shown more grace, wisdom, and true nobility in her little finger than I have witnessed in all your years at court." The crowd drew in a collective breath as he turned to face the assembled company. "Indeed, I intend to ask Miss Wren for her hand in marriage. Her knowledge of healing herbs first drew my notice, but her gentle heart has won my own. Let any who would mock her remember that soon they may bow before her as their duchess." The silence that followed was absolute. Clarissa stood rooted to the spot, her mind whirling like the dancers of moments before. The Baroness's face had gone white as chalk, her fan hanging forgotten at her side. Later, as their small cart bumped along the darkened road toward home, Clarissa sat beside her mother in stunned silence. The night air was cool against her hot cheeks, and the stars wheeled overhead as unchanged as ever. Yet everything else had shifted like sand beneath her feet. "A duke's bride," her mother murmured, squeezing her hand. "Who would have thought our herbs would lead to this?" Clarissa could only shake her head, still unable to find words for how a simple day of delivering mint and thyme had ended with the promise of a diamond ring. The morning sun had barely touched the frost-covered window panes when the clatter of hooves and wheels drew Clarissa to look outside. A magnificent black carriage stood before their cottage, the Duke's crest gleaming in gold upon its door. Two matched bay horses stamped their feet against the cold, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air. "Are you ready, my dear?" her mother asked softly, touching Clarissa's shoulder. They had packed their few belongings into 2 worn leather bags the night before. Simple dresses, her mother's cherished books of herb lore, and Clarissa's dried flower collection seemed meager treasures to bring to a duke's manor. The footman loaded their bags while helping them into the plush interior. Clarissa had never sat on such fine velvet cushions. As the carriage rolled through the village, she caught glimpses of familiar faces watching from windows and doorways. The baker's wife waved, and several children ran alongside until the carriage picked up speed. The journey was long, taking them through forests and over hills Clarissa had never seen. The smooth roads near town gave way to muddy tracks that made the carriage sway and bounce. Her mother dozed, but Clarissa stayed awake, watching the changing landscape with wide eyes. When they finally passed through massive iron gates, Clarissa's breath caught in her throat. Ashbourne Manor rose before him like something from a fairy tale. Gray stone walls climbing toward the sky, dozens of windows catching the afternoon light, chimneys trailing smoke into the autumn air. Gardens spread in every direction, though. The flowers were mostly gone for winter. "Welcome to Ashbourne," a stern-faced butler greeted them at the entrance. His name was Winters, and despite his rigid posture, his eyes held a kindly gleam. He led them into a hall so vast their footsteps echoed. Clarissa tried not to stare at the paintings of stern-faced ancestors lining the walls. "Miss Winters will instruct you in the ways of the household," the butler explained, introducing them to his sister, a neat woman in black silk who served as housekeeper. She guided them through a maze of corridors, showing them to their chambers, rooms larger than their entire cottage. The lessons began immediately. No, Miss Winters corrected gently, demonstrating a proper curtsy. "Lower and hold the skirts." Just so. Clarissa practiced until her knees ached, then moved on to learning the proper forms of address for various ranks of nobility. At dinner, Clarissa faced an overwhelming array of silver utensils. She chose the wrong fork for her fish and blushed deeply, but the Duke merely smiled from his place at the head of the table. "I confess," he said kindly, "I still sometimes forget which spoon is for soup and which for dessert." Between lessons, Clarissa found comfort in small kindnesses. She helped a maid gather fallen leaves from the garden paths, shared her mother's remedies with the cook for his aching joints, and listened to the stories of an elderly gardener about the manor's history. Word spread quickly through the servants. Quarters about her consideration and lack of heirs. The Duke observed these interactions from windows and doorways, his expression softening each time he saw her stop to help or listen. Once, passing in a corridor, he paused to say, "You bring warmth to these old stones, Miss Wren." That evening, standing at the window of her chamber, Clarissa watched candlelight flicker in dozens of windows across the manor's facade. The moon hung like a silver coin above the gardens, and somewhere an owl called softly. She pressed her hands together, closing her eyes. "Lord," she whispered, "grant me strength for this new life. Let me not fail those who have placed their trust in me." The candlelight wavered, casting shadows on the tapestried walls as she stood, in silent prayer. The morning sun painted golden light across Ashbourne Manor's extensive gardens. Dew sparkled on unfurling rose petals as Clarissa walked beside the Duke along the gravel paths. Her simple blue morning dress rustled against the neat hedgerows, while his tall figure kept a gentlemanly pace beside her. "You see, Your Grace," Clarissa said, stopping beside a bed of crimson roses, "these beauties offer more than their lovely scent. The petals, when dried and steeped, can ease a troubled stomach." She reached out, carefully avoiding the thorns, and touched a velvet soft petal. The Duke's eyes brightened with interest. "Indeed? I had no notion our gardens held such secrets." His voice, once so stern, had softened over the days since her arrival. "Oh yes," she continued, moving to a patch of bright marigolds. "And these cheerful flowers? They can heal small cuts when made into a salve." She knelt, her skirts pooling around her, to touch the sunny blooms. "My mother taught me their uses when I was just a girl." "Your knowledge brings new life to these grounds," the Duke said warmly. "I confess, I had quite forgotten the gardens could be more than mere decoration." Days flowed one into another like honey from a jar, sweet and slow. Clarissa found herself settling into a gentle routine at Ashburn Manor. In the evenings, she and the Duke would retire to the library, where beeswax candles cast a warm glow over leather-bound books. He would read aloud from volumes of poetry, while she worked on her embroidery, their quiet companionship filling the room like music done in a hothouse. Clarissa created a special section for her medicinal herbs. The Duke often joined her there, rolling up his fine shirt sleeves to help her transplant seedlings. "My late wife Catherine never cared for gardening," he shared one afternoon, hands deep in rich soil. She preferred her paintings and pianoforte. Clarissa looked up from her rosemary plants, noting the shadow that crossed his face. "Tell me about her," she said softly. The Duke was quiet for a long moment, gently patting soil around a feverfew plant. "She was like a butterfly," he said finally. "Beautiful, delicate, and somehow always just out of reach." He sighed. The fever took her so quickly. "I am sorry for your loss," Clarissa said simply, her heart aching for his pain. "You know," he replied, a small smile touching his lips, "you are the first person who has let me speak of her without awkwardness. Everyone else hurries to change the subject." Their conversations flowed as naturally as the stream that wound through the gardens. The Duke found himself sharing memories he had locked away for years, while Clarissa spoke of her own father's passing and her mother's strength in carrying on. Their shared understanding of loss drew them closer with each passing day dawn as spring deepened. The Duke noticed something changing in his great house. The halls, once so silent, now rang with occasional laughter. Servants smiled more freely, and even the stern housekeeper was seen hiding a grin when Clarissa mixed up the proper forms of address yet again. One evening, as torches flickered in their wall brackets, the Duke and Clarissa walked the long gallery. After supper, he stopped beneath a portrait of his ancestors and turned to face her. "My dear Miss Wren," he said softly, "I must thank you." Clarissa looked up at him, puzzled. "Whatever for, Your Grace?" "For bringing laughter back to Ashburn Manor. These halls have been too quiet for too long." He took her hand in his touch gentle and warm. Bending slightly, he pressed his lips to her knuckles in a courtly kiss. Clarissa felt her cheeks flush pink in the torchlight, her heart fluttering like a captive bird. I am glad to have been of service," she managed to whisper, acutely, aware of his touch still lingering on her hand. The whispers began like autumn leaves, scattered at first, then gathering into drifts of malice. Through the halls of Ashburn Manor, servants' voices carried tales of enchantment and dark arts. Clarissa's heart grew heavy as she passed the kitchen one gray morning and heard two maids speaking in hushed tones. She must have bewitched him with those herbs of hers, one whispered, not knowing Clarissa stood just beyond the doorway. No Duke would look twice at a market girl otherwise. "I heard she makes strange brews by moonlight," the other replied. "My cousin in the village says she's been seen gathering plants in the churchyard at midnight." Clarissa's hands trembled as she clutched her basket of dried lavender. The accusations were false. She had never practiced anything but honest healing, but she knew how quickly such rumors could spread. Already, word had reached the village that the Duke of Ashburn had fallen under a commoner's spell. The morning bell had barely finished ringing when Father Matthews, the local priest, arrived at the manor. His usually kind face was stern as he requested a private audience with Clarissa in the library. The old priest's eyes fixed upon her herbal sachets with clear suspicion. "My child," he began, his voice heavy with concern, "I must ask about these healing plants you use. Some say they are not meant for Christian purposes." "Father, I assure you," Clarissa replied, her voice steady despite her racing heart, "I use God's gifts as my mother taught me, to ease pain and bring comfort to the sick. Nothing more." Before the priest could respond, the library doors burst open. 3 elegantly dressed nobles from London swept in, their silk skirts rustling with disapproval. Leading them was Lady Henrietta, whose sharp features twisted into a sneer. "Really, Father Matthews, why dignify her with questions?" Lady Henrietta's voice dripped with disdain. "A common market girl suddenly catching a duke's eye? The answer is obvious." The room quickly filled with more members of the local gentry, forming an impromptu council. Their accusations flew like arrows. Witchcraft, corruption of a noble line, using charms to steal a title. Clarissa stood trembling but upright, her mother's teachings about dignity keeping her chin high even as tears threatened. "I have done nothing wrong," she stated firmly. "I love him truly, with an honest heart." "Silence!" thundered Lord Blackwood, his face red with anger. "You dare speak of love? You have brought shame upon this house with your common ways and witches' herbs." The heavy doors slammed open once more, and the Duke of Ashburn strode in, his tall frame rigid with anger. The room fell silent at his commanding presence. "How dare you?" His voice was quiet but sharp as steel. "How dare you come into my home and assault the woman I have chosen with these base accusations?" Lady Henrietta stepped forward. "Your Grace, we speak only out of concern for your position, your reputation, my reputation." The Duke's laugh held no warmth. "And what of your reputation? Gathered here like vultures to tear at an innocent woman's character. I am still master here, and I will not have her maligned." But Clarissa saw the subtle exchanges of glances, the whispered comments. Behind fans, the Duke's authority, once absolute, was being questioned because of her, because he had chosen to love beneath his station. Later, in her chamber, Clarissa sat alone as darkness crept across the sky. Candlelight flickered on the teardrops that fell onto her clasped hands. "Dear God," she whispered into the growing shadows, "I never meant to bring him harm. I love him too much to see him brought low because of me." The candles burned lower, casting long shadows on the wall as Clarissa wept, her prayers for strength mixing with her tears. Outside her window, the moon rose over Ashburn Manor. Indifferent to the heartache below, the great hall of Ashburn Manor blazed with hundreds of candles, their light dancing off crystal goblets and golden plates. The Duke had arranged this grand dinner to silence the whispers, to show his unwavering support for Clarissa. She sat beside him at the high table, wearing a gown of cream silk adorned with sprigs of fresh rosemary and lavender simple herbs that spoke of her true nature. "My dear," the Duke murmured, covering her trembling hand with his own, "you look radiant tonight." Clarissa smiled, drawing strength from his touch. The elaborate feast before them seemed a far cry from her market stall, yet she held her head high. She had learned enough of courtly manners to navigate the array of silver cutlery, though her movements remained more modest than the practiced grace of the noble lady's present dot as the evening progressed. The atmosphere grew warmer. Even Lady Henrietta, who had been so cruel before, offered a grudging compliment on Clarissa's knowledge of medicinal plants. The music from the small chamber orchestra filled the hall with gentle melodies, and servants moved silently between the tables, refilling wine glasses and replacing empty platters. "Perhaps we judged too hastily," Clarissa heard one baroness whisper to another. "She has a certain natural dignity about her." The Duke's eyes shone with pride as he watched Clarissa engaging conversation with his guests. She spoke of her herbs with passion, but without pretension, and several ladies expressed interest in her healing tisanes. The evening seemed to sparkle with possibility, with hope that she might truly find acceptance in this grand world. Just as the final course was being cleared away, a commotion arose at the hall's entrance. A messenger, travel-stained and urgent, pushed past the footman. He carried a sealed letter marked with a legal crest. "Your Grace," the messenger bowed, extending the letter. This arrived from London with instructions it be delivered immediately. The Duke broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The hall fell silent as he read, the only sound the crackling of the great fireplace. Clarissa watched as his face changed first. Confusion, then disbelief, and finally a cold anger that made her blood run cold. "My lord?" she ventured softly. "What news?" He did not answer immediately. Instead, he rose from his chair, the letter crushed in his fist. "Ladies and gentlemen," his voice rang out, harder than she had ever heard it, "I have here a detailed account of one Thomas Wren, who died in debtor's prison 3 years past." Clarissa's heart stopped. Her father. "This man," the Duke continued, "was not merely a debtor, but a criminal who embezzled funds from his employer and fled justice, leaving countless victims penniless." Gasps and murmurs filled the hall. Clarissa felt the blood drain from her face as every eye turned toward her. The shame that her mother had tried so hard to hide, the real reason they had moved to Ashbourne, was now laid bare before all. "Your Grace," she began, rising unsteadily. "I did not know," but the Duke had already turned away, his shoulders rigid with disappointment. The warmth that had filled the hall moments before frosted over with judgment and vindication. "Lady," Henrietta's triumphant smile cut like a knife. Through the longest night of her life, Clarissa waited in her chamber, but the Duke did not come to speak with her. When dawn's first light crept through her window, a servant arrived with the news she had dreaded. A carriage waited to take her away from Ashbourne Manor. With shaking hands, she gathered her few belongings in her precious basket of herbs. The Manor's halls, so recently filled with music and hope, echoed emptily with her footsteps as she descended to the courtyard. The small carriage looked shabby next to the Duke's grand coaches, a fitting return to her proper station. As the carriage pulled away, Clarissa clutched her basket of herbs to her chest, each bump in the road matching the broken rhythm of her heart. Through tear-blurred eyes, she watched Ashbourne Manor disappear into the morning mist, taking with it all her dreams of love and acceptance. The carriage wheels crunched on familiar gravel as Clarissa returned to her modest cottage. Her mother waited at the door, arms outstretched, ready to catch her falling tears. The morning sun cast long shadows across the village square, where townsfolk paused in their daily tasks to stare and whisper behind raised hands. "There she goes, the would-be Duchess. Pride comes before a fall, they say. Back to selling herbs, no doubt." Clarissa kept her head down as she carried her belongings inside. The cottage felt smaller now, its wooden beams lower, its windows dimmer after the grandeur of Ashbourne Manor. Yet it was home, and here at least she need not pretend to be anything more than who she was. "Never mind them, love," her mother soothed, helping her unpack her basket of herbs. "You are worth 10 of their wagging tongues." The next morning, Clarissa forced herself to return to the market square. Her hands trembled as she arranged her dried flowers and herbs on the rough-hewn stall. The familiar scents of lavender and rosemary brought tears to her eyes. They reminded her too much of the Duke's gardens, of quiet walks and gentle conversations. Now lost forever, where once customers had flocked to her stall, now they passed by with averted eyes. Those who did stop spoke in hushed, pitying tones, or worse, with barely concealed satisfaction at her downfall. The weight of their judgment pressed heavily upon her shoulders. A blessing, really, She overheard Mrs. Timmins tell the baker's wife. Imagine her trying to be a proper duchess. Why? She can barely read. Clarissa's cheeks burned, but she kept her hands busy, tying bundles of chamomile with careful precision. She would not let them see her cry. Days merged into weeks. Autumn winds grew sharp, rattling dried leaves across cobblestones. Clarissa found some peace in her work, in the simple act of helping others with her herbs. Yet her smile had lost its warmth, and her eyes no longer sparkled with joy. Then one cold morning, her mother did not rise from bed. Clarissa found her burning with fever, her nightdress soaked with sweat. Just a chill, her mother insisted weakly. But Clarissa recognized the glazed look in her eyes, the rattle in her chest that spoke of something far more serious. With desperate energy, Clarissa threw herself into caring for her mother. She brewed strong teas of elderflower and thyme, prepared cooling poultices of witch hazel and yarrow, and bathed her mother's forehead with lavender-scented cloths. Through long days and longer nights, she barely left the sick room. Such a good girl, her mother murmured in lucid moments, patting Clarissa's hand. My brave, kind girl. In the quiet hours between nursing duties, Clarissa's thoughts would drift to the Duke. She remembered his gentle hands, his quiet strength, the way his eyes had softened when she spoke of her herbs. In those moments, her heart ached with such intensity she could barely breathe. Lord, she whispered into the darkness, grant me peace, help me forget. But peace proved elusive. Outside, a storm gathered force, sending rain lashing against the cottage windows. Thunder rolled across the hills like drums of war, and lightning illuminated the small bedroom in harsh flashes. Clarissa sat beside her mother's bed, watching the candle flame dance in the draught. Its light was growing dim, like her hopes, like her mother's labored breathing. Tears fell silently down her cheeks as she held her mother's burning hand. The storm raged on, rattling the shutters with fierce determination. In the flickering shadows, Clarissa felt more alone than she ever had in her market stall, more lost than she had been in the grand halls of Ashburn Manor. She bowed her head, her tears falling onto the rough blanket as thunder shook the very foundations of their humble home. That the early morning silence in Ashburn Manor shattered as the Duke burst from his study, a crumpled letter in his trembling hand. His trusted steward followed close behind, carrying a stack of documents that proved beyond doubt that the accusations against Clarissa's father were false. The elegant script that had brought such pain was none other than his cousin, Edward's hand, a man whose greed for the dukedom had finally unveiled itself. Ready my horse, the Duke commanded, his voice raw with regret. Now, rain pelted against the windows as servants scrambled to obey. The Duke paid no mind to the weather, nor to the protests of his household as he mounted his stallion. The beast's hooves thundered across the cobblestones and onto the muddy road leading to the village. His fine coat grew heavy with rain, but he pressed on, thinking only of Clarissa's tears as she had been sent away. The village streets were nearly empty when he arrived, save for a few startled traders setting up their morning stalls. The Duke dismounted, his boots sinking into the mud as he rushed toward the small cottage where he knew Clarissa lived. His heart pounded as he approached the worn wooden door. Before he could knock, the door creaked open, and there stood Clarissa, her eyes widening at the sight of him. She wore a simple brown dress, her hair tied back simply, yet to him she had never looked more beautiful. Without hesitation, the Duke dropped to his knees in the mud before her. Clarissa, he breathed, his voice breaking. I have wronged you, grievously. The letter was false, a plot by my cousin Edward to claim my lands. He looked up at her, rain streaming down his face. I was a fool to doubt you, to let pride and fear cloud my judgment. I would renounce my title this very moment if it meant having you by my side again. Clarissa stood frozen in the doorway, one hand pressed against the rough wooden frame. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the steady drumming of rain. "Your Grace," she finally whispered, her voice trembling. "You need not kneel before me." "I must," he insisted, "until you grant me your forgiveness, though I scarce deserve it." From inside the cottage came a weak voice. "Clarissa? Who calls? At this hour?" The Duke recognized the voice of Clarissa's mother, and his heart clenched with fresh guilt. Clarissa glanced back into the cottage, concern evident on her face. "Mother has been ill," she explained softly. "The fever, please," the Duke said, rising from the mud. "Let me help. I'll send for my physician immediately." Clarissa's eyes filled with tears as she studied his face. "You would do that? Even now?" "I would do anything," he vowed. "Anything to make amends, to prove my love for you is true and lasting." Moment passed between them, heavy with unspoken words. Then, slowly, Clarissa reached out and took his mud-stained hand in hers. "Come inside, Your Grace. You're soaked through." They entered the humble cottage together, where Clarissa's mother lay propped up on pillows in her bed near the hearth. Her eyes brightened at the sight of the Duke, and a knowing smile crossed her pale face. "So you've returned," she said softly. "Love finds its way home, does it not?" The Duke knelt beside her bed, still holding Clarissa's hand. "It does indeed, madam. If you and your daughter can find it in your hearts to forgive me." The older woman reached out with trembling hands, placing one atop their joined ones. "There is nothing to forgive when love speaks true," she whispered. "The heart knows what it knows. Titles and scandals be hanged." Clarissa's fingers tightened around the Duke's as her mother blessed their union. Outside, the rain began to ease, and a shaft of sunlight broke through the clouds. Streaming through the cottage window, the morning sun bathed Ashbourne's small stone church in golden light as villagers filled the worn wooden pews. Herbs and wildflowers lovingly gathered by. The market vendors decorated every corner with spots of color. The scent of lavender and rosemary filled the air, a touching reminder of how this love story began. Clarissa stood before the altar in a cream-colored dress adorned with delicate embroidery, her mother's lace veil flowing behind her. Her hands trembled slightly as she held a simple bouquet of herbs and meadow flowers. The Duke, dressed more plainly than his station demanded, gazed at her with such tenderness that tears sparkled in the eyes of even the most hardened observers. As the priest spoke the ancient words, the couple's voices rang clear and true through the hushed church. "I do," they each declared, their words echoing off the stone walls. When the wedding band, a simple gold circle, slipped onto Clarissa's finger, the church bells began to toll, their joyous pealing spreading across the countryside. The celebration that followed brought together all ranks of society. Servants and nobles, merchants and farmers shared tables in the churchyard, feasting on fresh bread and roasted meats. Children danced around the newlyweds, scattering flower petals and herbs in their path. The Duke's steward read out a proclamation announcing that Edward, the scheming cousin, had been stripped of his properties and banished from Ashbourne after his plot was exposed. As afternoon mellowed into evening, the Duke and his new Duchess addressed their gathered people. Standing hand in hand, they declared their intentions for the future of Ashbourne. The Duke's voice carried across the crowd as he announced the establishment of a free hospital where Clarissa would oversee the preparation of herbal medicines for all who needed them. "My wife's knowledge of healing plants shall benefit not just the nobility, but every soul in need," he proclaimed proudly. "And we shall employ widows and those in need to tend these healing gardens." Clarissa stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "We pledge to treat all fairly, tenant and noble alike. For it was in the market square that love found us, proving that true worth lies not in titles, but in the heart." The crowd erupted in cheers, many wiping away tears. Old women, who had once whispered about witchcraft, now pressed forward to kiss Clarissa's hands. The same shopkeeper who had once mocked her now bowed deeply, offering sincere congratulations. As the celebrations continued around them, the Duke and Duchess slipped away for a walk through the market square. The familiar stalls stood empty in the evening light, yet the space hummed with memories. Clarissa paused at her old herb stand, now draped in celebratory ribbons. "To think," she said softly, "it all began here, with a troubled heart seeking peace." The Duke squeezed her hand, his wedding band catching the light, and found so much more than mere herbs could provide. As they walked among the stalls, townspeople stopped their work to bow or curtsy, not from obligation, but genuine respect. The baker's wife rushed out to press a warm loaf into Clarissa's hands, while the blacksmith doffed his cap to them both. Children, who had once hidden from the Duke, now ran up to present Clarissa with small posies of wildflowers. The market square, once a place of whispers and judgment, had transformed into a symbol of love's power to bridge any divide. Clarissa, in her simple wedding dress and band, walked as proudly as any duchess born to the title. The Duke, his arm linked with hers, showed no hint of shame or regret, only joy in having chosen love over convention. "God bless the Duke and Duchess," called out the elderly flower seller, and the cry was taken up by others in the square. "God bless them both." Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.